G'day, welcome to the AgriCoach podcast for families on the land who want to grow their family's wealth and prosperity across the generations. I'm your host, Ben Law, and I'm the financial bloke. G'day, welcome back to the AgriCoach Wealth and Wisdom podcast, the show for families who want more than just financial success. They want to grow and protect their wealth, strengthen relationships, and keep the success rolling across the generations. My name's Ben Law, and I'm the financial bloke. And today we're talking about one thing that makes or breaks the family when it comes to succession: preparation. Now, here's the truth. Most families do a piss poor job of it. They wait too long, they avoid the hard conversations, and they convince themselves they'll deal with it one day. Most putting it into the too hard basket, hoping the time will magically sort it out. And most of the time, they're shit out of luck. But the families who absolutely nail it, the ones who hand over smoothly and keep growing, do three things better than everyone else. Number one, they prepare the agribusiness so it's profitable and structured and purpose-built for the next generation to take over. Number two, they prepare the current generation to step back with real clarity and a purpose and to prepare for an exciting next stage of their life. And number three, they prepare the next generation with the skills and experience to step up with the confidence required to be a great leader. My guest today knows this better than most. Tim Lane is a succession planner with Proagtive who spent more than 2 decades working with farming families across Australia. He grew up on the land in northern New South Wales, built a career in banking and finance, and for the past 15 years has helped families navigate the tricky business of passing the baton from one generation to the next. I wanted to talk to Tim because he's been in hundreds of family meeting rooms. He's seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And he's kind of developed a sixth sense for spotting which families are going to thrive and which ones are going to struggle, and those that'll absolutely turn into a shit fight. In this chat, we're going to unpack what these thriving families have in common, why preparation is absolutely everything, and what practical steps you can start taking long before you're in the thick of succession. Now, before we dive in, if you're getting value from these conversations, the best thank you can give us is to follow or subscribe to the podcast on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It takes just 2 seconds, but it really helps us reach more good farming families like you and help them become high-performing families. So without further delay, welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Thanks very much, Ben. Looking forward to the chat.
Now, Tim, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a little while now, and you've been in this whole succession facilitation space for a heck of a long time now. And I want to get the quick version of you because I want to really get stuck into the meat of this podcast. But where are you now, mate? How did you get here, and what pulled you into the succession work to start with?
Yeah, it's interesting how things sometimes come together. So I was actually at Beef Week in Rockhampton in 2009. I was up there in the valuation business that I was attached to. And no, my apologies. It was actually when I was in the bank. So I was actually in banking still at that point in time because I made the shift 2010. As part of the bank that I was in, we had a private wealth area, so the private banking. I was involved in that, and we had in that our own risk specialists, our own financial planning specialists, and we also had estate planning lawyers. And so we'd go out and talk to customers about estate planning and things like that. And as we opened up Townsville and Cairns in terms of that, we'd have those same customers say, "Oh, can you do our succession planning?" And I go, no, it's a different thing. You know, the estate plan comes from succession planning. Rolled forward, long story short, up at Beef Week with the bank up there. And I actually heard Isabel speaking in one of the pavilions. I think it was ABC Radio were interviewing her over the actual pavilion. And I've gone, because I started researching who does this and to try and find a solution that we could integrate with from the bank's perspective. Went over, listened to the interview, went over and waited for it to finish. And there was Isabel and her former partner there, Sarah. And at the end of it, I just walked up and said, "G'day, this is who I am." And Isabel very affronted to start with and, who are you and what are you about and all this. So basically we just ended up in a couple of conversations. And then as I finished up my career in the banking world, 2010, prior to that I'd invited Isabel as part of a PD day to come and speak to our team about what succession planning was, what are the issues, the challenges, and almost how it integrates with what is the technical piece, because out of the succession plan comes all the technical bits. long story short, when I finished up at the bank, Isabel approached me and said, hey, I think you might be okay doing this work. Do you want to have a chat? So one thing led to another, and I combined that with a part-time role in valuation then, as well as the succession planning. So, yeah, that's where it started. I did have to get through a fairly in-depth interview with her husband because I was going to be travelling all over the countryside, and he's going, who are you and what are you about? But no, he was looking after his wife very well. So
Awesome. And so you've been doing other things at the same time, but succession's been something you've done as the facilitation, not as your full-time gig either.
No, that's right. And at that stage, the business wasn't big enough to sort of warrant or support, full-time in that side. But I'm also someone, I like that little bit of variety in a few things. Interestingly, however, the combination of both the finance background, the valuation side, so I was in charge of the agribusiness part for a company, Harrington White at the time, and then the succession. So you'd actually get all that information, that professional information, if you like, from that valuation and talking to the banks, the financiers and that, but also understanding what was happening in the asset value in the marketplace. Then I'd go out and work with the families, and you got the on-ground, real truth about what was going on and, the numbers, the financials, also to a degree, a bit of that disconnect between one element of the market and what families were going through. So it's sort of a really unique position to have that information coming in from various areas to be able to sort of help consider, the thought processes and the solutions and understand where the challenges were coming from.
So, mate, I'm guessing you've sat around, let's say, possibly hundreds of kitchen tables or boardroom tables with people over your career, Tim. And I'm guessing you've probably picked yourself up a bit of a sixth sense, I suppose you'd say, when you walk in the room to be able to go, you walk in the room, you meet them, you have a conversation, and you say, well, these people are going to be okay. And also these ones are going to do it tough. And probably at the end, who's going to be cooked from the start? So my question to you, mate, is can you actually do that? And what does it usually look like when you walk in a room?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? And I suppose, succession. So first of all, for me, succession planning is just part of a broader business plan and business strategy. It's not its own thing in one sense. It's just, you've got marketing, you've got production, you've got finance, everything else. So succession planning should be just part of a normal conversation about how you're going to evolve the business and the family within, the mix of assets and opportunity that people have. The challenge, I think, within that is that, people did it this way because of those reasons back then, and there's almost you can see history repeat itself quite often. And so for those, when you step into a room and start asking questions around how they think about things, how they think about the future, how they prepare for the inevitable what's coming, and they are life-based events, they are births, deaths and marriages, and all of those things, and they trigger certain actions or certain outcomes. So it's not like they're unknown. And then, yes, you've got your commodity, your production systems, your environment and all the rest. But at the end of the day, it should be just part of, what's the medium to long-term plan? A lot of people get stuck in that day-to-day operational, and they actually just don't take the time to step back and go, well, actually, what is this all for? What's the purpose? What are we aiming to achieve? And when you start to have the conversation, so we have individual conversations with all the family members first before we put everybody into a room, because we do want to understand. They have to fill out questionnaires and things first, and that helps them think about things that they may not have considered, or they'll push it to the side. But when you come back and go like any business, you can ask a few questions and get a real sense whether they're in touch and in tune, or whether something is working. But almost in the banking side, I used to say 85% of my customers succeeded despite themselves. But the 15% that really knew what they were doing really ran and created value and grew opportunity and all that. And I don't think it's any different to whether it's agriculture and engineering business. It wouldn't matter. You've got those that do it really well and have a game plan, and those that sort of go along for the ride and they achieve and they get outcomes. But is it as effective as it could be, or is it in line with an overarching bigger plan? And the challenges in succession are, from a rural production, is really quite simple. Really big asset bases and often fairly poor cash flows, and how do you make all that mix work? So those that understand and embrace that and go, we've got a plan for it, you can pick them pretty quickly.
Yeah, I generally can. I mean, we did our 2-day roadmap workshop last week, and we had 13 families in the room. About half were half were mums and dads and half were the next generation. And most of them were sort of that 5 to 15 years from succession, which is the space we operate in. And by the end of the 2 days, or very early actually, but definitely by the end of 2 days, you could really see the families that were going to do it easy, if that makes sense. Obviously, it's not going to be easy, but compared to everyone else, and then those that are going to really hit the skids and struggle. And for me, the population of the ones I could see that were going to be were going to do it well was a lot higher than I think the industry average. But the common thing that I see, Tim, is that the ones that seem to do well have two common traits. Is number one is they went through a fairly shitty succession themselves. And they looked at it and go, God, that was God awful. I never want to have to deal with that myself. And therefore, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want my kids to deal with it. And the second factor that I quite often see is they're addressing it head on and they're starting early. So they're saying things like, I know I'm not ready to pull up stumps yet. I've still got another 5, 10, 15 years left in me to drive this business forward. And I'm in my prime, but they're starting to plan for, well, what does that next phase look like? And that's a rare thing to see in families because it's really hard for families to find the time to be able to talk about these things because it goes in the important but not urgent category for most of them.
I 100% agree. And that timeline, for most of the clients that I have been fortunate enough to work with, typically it's been an 8 to 12 odd year strategy. So succession just doesn't happen at the end. It's not an event thing. It is a process. And so you start a process and you've got to be clear, what your objective is. And I say to people in those meetings, it's a bit like working out a plan to say you're going to climb Mount Everest. Now, the pathway you take and how you get there can vary depending on the circumstances at the time, but the objective is still the same objective. And so whatever that end game plan is, that becomes, the target on the hill. And then it's everything that happens in between. And it is another project. Farmers are invariably busy all the time. They don't allocate time. They don't allocate, the room just to think. And so, it is hard for them to step back out of that operational and just, get into what is, longer term holistic planning. But when done well, and I suppose part of the role of what Proactive is about, I'm not sure, is to help keep people on track. So it's to, project manage them to help them get to where they need to go along the way. And you have some wonderful experiences through that with, people getting engaged and married and children and all those things along the way because you see that journey open up over a period of time.
Mm. High-performing families don't sit around waiting for succession to turn into a crisis. They prepare early, 5, 10, and sometimes 15 years before anyone's talking retirement. That's what the dozen families at our last Roadmap workshop came to do, and they rated it 9.5 out of 10, with feedback like, I finally understand where I fit. We've got structure and clarity now, and we should have done this years ago. They walked in uncertain. They walked out aligned, confident, and energised about the future. And for some, it was the first time they'd ever sat down as a family and talked about what comes next. We ran 4 Roadmap workshops this year, and every single one sold out. The most recent one was almost entirely families who were on the wait list. In 2026, I've only got capacity to run 2 of them, and they will sell out again. So if you want first crack at the seats when dates open, get on the wait list now. Join agricoach.com.au/take action. That's www.agricoach.com.au/take action. All right, let's get back to the episode. It's interesting, Tim. I just want to circle back to that point you made just a second ago about time to think. The other observation I made last week, which was nice to see, we had, as I said, 13 families in the room, Tim, and we had 3 dads who were driven, motivated, successful, who didn't want to be there. You could just tell right from the start. I looked across the room. There's almost 50 people in the room and you can see them. They're looking at their watch. They're looking at their phone. They're looking around. You can see them screwing up their face as you're going through things thinking, I've got a million bloody things to do other than this. And each of them were in their early 50s. So, around that 50 to 53. There's plenty of miles left on the tyres. And the really cool part was all three of them came up independently over the 2 days and said, Ben, you know what? My wife dragged me along here. I really had plenty of other things to do and didn't want to be here, but oh my God, I'm glad we did. Because they said we started having the conversations as a couple and with our kids and planning what the next phase looks like. And all of a sudden, I was able to pop my head up from the day-to-day stuff that we're dealing with, which is lots of pressure, and actually start thinking about the future. And it's not as terrifying as I thought.
Yeah, and I would think that's a constant experience. Often is the dad getting dragged in. It's, mum does the research. Sort of funny, and again, you go back to, can you pick them? We sort of used to always have this, if dad rang to inquire, we go, right, because everyone waits for dad to make the decision. If mum's making the inquiry, then there's something. If it's the daughter-in-law, the son, so it depends on who makes the inquiry. You can almost tell where the issue is or where the starting point is, depending on what's going on in the family. But yeah, invariably someone's getting dragged into the room. But it's about, the old saying, ignorance is bliss. For a lot of people, if they're ignorant, the blissful don't worry about it. But it is about bringing forward conversations that can be a bit uncomfortable, but bringing a conscious awareness to issues, matters and things that are, again, invariably going to happen.
Yeah, and it is terrifying for a lot of people, but my experience over time is, Tim, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is quite often the weight of not having had the discussion weighs heavily on families. And I think once they've actually started having those conversations, 9 times out of 10, they're not as painful as they think they are. They're actually quite a relief. It's like almost pulling the splinter out of your hand. It's painful to pull the splinter out, but then we can start healing, moving forward. And I actually think quite often with the right attitude, don't get me wrong, if you've got a family with the wrong attitude, it's going to struggle. But if you've got the right attitude, it can actually be rocket fuel for the situation.
Yeah, I absolutely endorse those comments. And it's, people who sort of come into that process and again sort of dragged a bit in, but once they have that clarity, and often, particularly the incumbents, so the parents, they often feel they've got to have all the answers already up front. And they haven't achieved, their life's goal or whatever else. And I'd often say to them, look, sometimes you've actually just got to put the thing on the table and let the next generation work it out. And then you see a whole lot of creativity, ideas. Okay, we know the game plan, we've got the clarity. So then they'll go and work out whether A, they step into it, and B, what they can do to help that process and facilitate to get that even quicker. Because, the old saying, clarity is kindness. So getting that clarity. But, and again, it's more so the dads I used to find, Ben, that you can sort of feel them going, falling within themselves. And yet it's because they hadn't achieved, but they don't have all the answers and they feel like they haven't, ticked all the boxes. And when you actually get them to shift that mindset to say, what you're creating is opportunity, what you've got to do is be clear what your wife needs and so what that looks like. Then everyone else underneath can get clear and then they can help create the solutions. It's like any business, I suppose. You've got to come together to work out how to create the solutions to move forward. And it's no different in a farming family context. And once that clarity is on the table, you really see, that next generation step right in and lean right in and go, right, what else can we do? How can we do it? How can we help it? Go out and drive trucks, do whatever they'll do to help get things to where they need to. So, yeah, it's a challenge, but again, it's that mindset and the starting early, having the conversation, it just helps shift, if you like, the burden from, 1 or 2 shoulders to, the family have that opportunity to make it all work and come together where it can.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I love working with the next generation, Tim. I love nothing more than seeing, those mid-20s young men and women excited about the future and really being driven and motivated, and mum and dad harnessing that and working together a team. It's beautiful to watch. And I get really privileged in my job of getting to work with families like that, but it's not always easy. And that quite often requires mum and dad, like you just mentioned, to step back a little bit and create the space and acknowledge that they either don't have all the answers or don't need to have all the answers. And it always shocks me, Tim, when you see some of these next generation all of a sudden go from a parent-child type relationship to an adult-adult, which Jill Rigney taught me quite a while ago. So just to shout out to Jill. But, they get into that adult-adult conversation and it'll shock you quite often what the kids will come up with. Now, not all their ideas will be awesome, but the amount of times I've seen mums and dads look over at an 18 or 19-year-old son or daughter and go, who are you? I've never seen this side of you. And then the son or daughter turns back and goes, well, you never asked me. And so there's some real power in actually sitting down in the family and say, hey, where are we going in the future? What do you guys want? I mean, mums and dads are terrified of putting pressure on their kids. For me, I say, don't put pressure on them. Just say, hey, let's start talking about the future. You're now 18 or 19 or 25. You're an adult now. We've got to start behaving like it. Where are you going? What are you doing? And it's amazing how sometimes those conversations can just flourish afterwards, and the next generation can start acting more like an adult and stop defaulting back to that parent-child relationship.
Yeah, 100%. And you're right, you've seen quite a few of those shocks in parents where, and then it's both ways. You know, sometimes the kids are looking and thinking, oh, mum and dad, blah, 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 and all of a sudden they go, actually, no, they're really all over this, and that, you know, they understand more than sometimes they're given credit for. And sometimes that next generation, you've got to sort of hold them back a little bit at times too, you know, get in and, you know, we'll gear it up and we'll double this and we'll go hard here and go, well. So it's understanding that risk and that balance and all that. But yeah, 100%, if you've got the opportunity to at least have an open conversation without pressure and just outline what does good look like, what's the picture, and then, it's amazing to see what comes forward. And they'll make life choices ultimately if they're that 18, 19-year-old. But as they get to that, 27, 28, I used to often say to Isabel, that's when the bell goes off in, the boy's head, the girl's head, and they've potentially met life's partner, and then it's that drawing back to home. So they might have gone away and done something else in the professional world, but always with a view that they'd like to come home to the family business. They're often unsure what that looks like. Sometimes they just turn up at the front door and, I instill psychology. Farmers are often sort of quite socialist. Well, it doesn't matter what job you have in the business, we're just going to pay you the same type thing. So they'd come home and often there wasn't a job, and then all of a sudden something's created and it morphs in, but there's, again, no structure, no clarity, no purpose around it. And you go, well, if you're doing that in a normal business, you'd actually set up a job, you'd have a purpose for the job, you'd have the terms of it, you'd have the engagement, and again, people have that clarity. So once they open up the door to a conversation, then it opens up all of those things. You go, right, well, what does this mean and how do we? And often businesses will grow another leg, or they'll, expand, they'll do this. And the concept, I think, for a lot of people in my mind, Ben, is they only look at, the perimeters of the boundary fences and go, well, we've got to deal with this bit. That's all we've got. But most of the successful succession solutions that I've seen is where they've actually grown another branch, grown another arm, expanded the operation, which then created more opportunity, but also solved problems down the track. So that expansionary mind versus that, dividing, cutting and dividing type concept, which invariably doesn't work because no one's viable in a long-term basis.
Because that does terrify a lot of families, is how do we have the conversation with the non-farming siblings? And I find, I'd like to hear whether you find the same, is they just don't know how to bring in the non-farming siblings to the conversation because they feel like, well, then everyone's going to want their piece of the pie, shall we say, or equal. Do you quite often find that's a bit of a road barrier for a lot of families? And then if it is, how would you approach something like that from your point of view?
Ben, it's a good question. Probably my experience would be that it hasn't been a major issue with the immediate family. It's probably when you get to the in-laws, the son-in-laws, the daughter-in-laws, there's a bit more reticence about, this is our family business and should they be in the room type thing. So, not really a major. There are times, don't get me wrong, where, parents just want to almost, where's the template, where's the recipe, we fill it out, we dish it out, and we go, we've done succession. Yeah, well, and again, it's the process you take people through to help them get the understanding of why the decisions are the decisions. And, to that extent, huge balance sheet, cash flows aren't overly strong necessarily. You've had bad years, whatever. And so it's really hard to get something to be equal because that's not viable. To get something fair can't always be equal. So how do you get people to reconcile and process that? So having them in the room is the only way you can get that understanding. And if people have had a chance to understand, be informed, and have a chance to be expressed and heard, well, then they can own outcomes. But, you would have been in those meetings, I'm sure, where someone's gone through and go, blah, 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 and someone will walk out of the room and go, well, I didn't agree to that, so I wasn't involved, so I'm not going to be bound to it. And it's almost that process you go through to help people sort of, morally connect to the outcome. And, yes, then you've got the technical bits that have to happen, but if you don't give them that opportunity, and whether they're the immediate family and inclusive of in-laws, which we always suggest, yes, absolutely. If they are important to this person in this family, then they're important. They're a stakeholder regardless, and they have influence. So if there's going to be issues, you're better off having the issues dealt with in the room than out of the room type concept.
I couldn't agree more with that, Tim. I mean, obviously there's exceptions to every rule, but my rule of thumb is if your son or daughter chooses to align themselves and marry someone and commit to them, they essentially have agreed that they want them to be part of the family. And so you've got to accept they're part of the family. And I understand the difficulties with that. But it's like I tell everyone, all these next generations from a young age, is your choice of spouse will make or break you. And if you are going to bring someone back into the family, I believe early on families should be discussing that, hey, you're going to go out there and hitch your wagon to someone, choose wisely, we'll invite them back into the family, but this is the values and the morals we hold, and hopefully they'll choose well. And then when you bring them back into the family, it'll be a much easier process, but that doesn't always happen. So Tim, I just want to jump onto something there. You said morally connect to the outcome. I love that statement. Can you just unpack that for me? Because I think that's a really important point that we probably glossed over, especially when it comes to this equal and not fair.
Yeah, and again, you've always got the technical bit. So if I go back up, succession planning is part of just helping coordinate a strategy, a plan, and having that buy-in. And then from that, you've got all the technical bits, the financial planning, bank finance, solicitor's account, whatever else. But the glue in the middle of that is ultimately have people being able to understand the why, be part of a process. And so whilst you've got to have the bits at the technical level to underpin it, it is that engagement and that buy-in. And as you, I'm sure, will have seen quite a few times been in conversations, often there's other issues that are outside that have an impact. And those chances for those things to be addressed and dealt with, sometimes the other person in that issue doesn't even remember the circumstances. But it's the people piece, and it's about, that it's got to sit okay in your gut. If you're waking up at 2 a.m. in the morning staring at the ceiling, well, that's just not right. And so if it can sit for people in their stomach that they've been through, had a chance, understand, and can accept in principle what's been agreed, then it's a much happier relationship. And then, yes, you just get all the technical bits sorted to achieve it. If you just turn up and deliver a solution without that involvement, well, what are you binding them to? What are they, mentally sort of and morally sort of attaching themselves to? It's really difficult. So then, they can underpin or undermine the whole rest of it if you don't have that piece. So having that connection at one level, and then a process that actually helps and supports families implement. Because whatever agreement or strategy is determined, over and above that, you've got to be able to execute that as well. So if it's not implementable, if it's not bankable, if it's not feasible or whatever else, well, then it's not an option. So you've also got to come back to the reality of either this can work or it can't, because theory is great, but if you can't implement it as a strategy, what's the old saying? 78% of all strategic plans fail through lack of implementation. So it's got to be implementable, but implementing also needs the buy-in, because often it's the time, it's the energy, it's the change of mindset or whatever it might be to also make that plan work. So, yeah, at a couple of layers, it needs to connect in the gut, in the values.
The thing that resonated there with me, Tim, was that with the morally connecting is the next generation and also the current generation have to understand that this is a difficult decision, how we carve up the family assets, whatever that might look like. And we all know if we had $20 million tied up in a share portfolio, you could just carve it up into equal portions and everyone would get the same, but it doesn't work like that. And you've got to get the next generation to actually agree and understand that, hey, I might not on a balance sheet be getting the same amount of money as my sister or brother who's getting a farm, but what I'm getting is I'm getting something else, some other support, and figuring out what's important to them now long term so they can, I hesitate to use the word, not live with it, but they can accept it and move forward and not hold that resentment and judgment.
Yes, agreed. But you can be a bit creative as well, so that those that may choose not to continue within the farming business, well, something often doesn't have to be the same quantum, but earlier in their life can have a big difference to how they live their life and the decisions they make. Everyone sort of thinks, the succession happens at the end when the estate gets dealt with type thing. Well, it can already have dealt with a whole lot of other things for many, many years in advance of an estate issue, because something small a bit earlier for someone, working in city, if it helps them today, well, let's talk about the housing. If it helped them get into a house that they couldn't otherwise afford to, and, as opposed to be locked out of a market for a long time and paying rent, that lets you make different choices in life. And so how families go about those things and the creativity, ultimately, first and foremost, the parents and the incumbents, it's their needs first. And, they have to plan to retire well, whatever that looks like and how they define it. But they've got to have a plan that they can tick that box, because otherwise, my experience is they don't take their hands off the steering wheel. They'll hang on because they haven't got where they need to be. They don't feel safe, secure, or they don't want to, put assets at risk. But once you've got that sorted, well, then you can start thinking about creatively how you can support others, but not necessarily have to literally hand over a farm at a certain point there. You can do other things way in advance. Those opportunities are there to help reconcile that piece.
But I think, again, and just to go back to your point, Tim, is that if they don't have the discussions as a family about how this is all working, and mum and dad just come out and say, well, this is what we're going to give you and this is what we're going to give you, and, deal with it, it's not good for family harmony. And ultimately, it might get buried under the carpet for a period of time, swept under the rug, but it's going to come out with a vengeance later on, with resentment and bitterness, and which we see happens in families all the time, even the best.
Absolutely. And without information or the facts, well, you've got assumption. So, if you sort of think about, grow up through school, often they've got to go away to school, so they're not necessarily, fully aware of the finances, because parents don't talk to their kids about their business and finances at that age and stage. So then they might go off to a tertiary, course and go into the workforce. So they might have a whole lot of assumptions about the business and what it's got and the viability, because they don't know. So when you have assumption, or when you have, assumption leads to gossip, leads to other issue, it's very easy to deal with that by saying, look, here are the facts, here's the information. Otherwise, if people are left to assume, then their minds will go wherever their minds want to go to. And sometimes that can be positive. They don't understand some of the struggles that parents have. Even if you think about the cost of education today in boarding schools, that's a big expense for a business. For a lot of families that I've worked with, that has been part of the how do we do this and also do that and do that and do that. They've got $1 of capital and we've got 5 different hands out saying we all want the same dollar. So they've got to make decisions and prioritise things, and that's not easy.
They've also got to have a discussion as a family, because if we all agree to the path forward, even if we don't think it's maybe the best, not everyone agrees it's the best path forward, but we all agree to move forward, it's got to be a lot better for the family than if it's just dictated from above.
Yeah, no one wants to be told what to do. You want to be engaged in and be part of the process, but again, also create an opportunity to be part of the potential solution. Kids do want to help their parents. Kids do want to see their parents successful. Parents want to see their kids successful. They want to have, that ongoing relationship with the grandchildren, all those sort of things. And both sides can help each other. And, the wonderful thing about succession is that you sort of touched on earlier, that energy that comes with that next generation that can sort of pick up and lift a business. And sometimes, you get to a certain age and stage and it's a bit harder, a bit tougher. You take less risks, business decisions start to vary. If you get the right combination of that energy and youth and optimism with the experience and that side, with a framework that is open to, I suppose, just challenge the status quo as such, then you see some really wonderful outcomes.
Tim, one of my absolute pet peeves, and something that I hear over and over again, is I'll see families come and talk to me, and I don't do succession facilitation, but I get plenty of people come here asking me if I do. But the real pet peeve for me is when I see they come in and they go, look, Ben, we wanted to start this 10 years ago, start having these discussions. We didn't know how. We went to our accountant, we went to our banker, we went to our lawyer, we went to our financial advisor, whoever it was. And they said, ooh, it's a bit early, don't you think? You could probably leave that a few more years. And next thing's 10 years go by, they're at the crunch, relationships have got frayed, mum and dad are stressed because they don't know what to do. And for me, I'm like, start the conversations as early as possible. In your experience, do you agree with that, mate? And how early should they start having the discussions in your eyes?
100% agree. We used to have people that would turn up to, look to engage, and they went to a succession workshop, 8 years before. And they've gone, oh, when we're ready to do that, we'll do that, with Proactive. And you go, why did you wait 8 years? Oh, well, we didn't have any issues then. So almost for a lot of people, they think about starting succession because there's now an issue. There's been an upset, there's been a problem, there's been a whatever it might be. And they go, oh, well, gee, we better get this sorted. So they've already lost that opportunity. And you're starting from a place of a negative position, because you've now got to deal with some other emotional issue or some impact that you've got to almost, take the baggage off the carousel first.
Yeah, triage.
Yeah, and that's really unfortunate. Instead of saying the best time to do succession, in my opinion, is A, it's never too early. And that can be just, a bit of education along the way. So we've had, teenagers in a room to start with. And it's just a little bit of education and information just for a little bit of, coaching, early coaching, just to start to develop a thinking pathway. It also gives you the earlier start, you can influence the pattern of communication. You touched on that sort of adult-child relationship, as opposed to the two-adult conversation. And you see families that do communicate well. You would have heard it a squillion times, Ben. Oh, no, we talk all the time. You talk to the next generation, they go, Dad never tells me anything. They go, yeah, but so they're talking operational in the paddock or the back of the ute about which mob of sheep and da-da-da-da-da, whereas they want to talk about the things that are important, but they don't get to that depth. So the ability to then have early communication or start to establish those better communication patterns around bigger decisions. And, we're talking the $10,000 an hour type decision as opposed to the $20 an hour job in the paddock. And probably the third thing for time, as I said earlier, typically for the overall plan to, get to the end of the plan, it's generally somewhere between 8 to sort of 12, can be up to 15 years, because you just can't click your fingers and make everything happen in agriculture. For every good year, there's an average year and then there's a poor year, etc. So you've got to build that into a plan that recognises the viability of the opportunity, the ability to create opportunity and grow something else, and then the ability to, again, retire well, hand on a good business opportunity, but cater for everybody who's involved. So, if you get to a certain age and stage, there's also challenges in terms of processing and thinking. So you can be too old, in all honesty, to be honest, in my opinion, Ben, because, again, you need time to roll out, but the way we think and process as we get older becomes a challenge and become more risk averse. And there's a bit of technical stuff at the end.
Tax becomes an issue.
Yeah. So, anywhere from 45 onwards as parents with, teenagers going into young adulthood and somewhere on there to give themselves a pathway of, 15 plus years. To me, that's sort of about the right spot, ideally.
Yeah. It's interesting. For me, I always say 5 to 15 years is the sweet spot. Once you're less than 5 years, you're getting into sort of triage where you're trying to fix things up. But the thing with it is, I look at it this way. If you start having these conversations when your kids are little, so let's say let's just allocate a time, say late teens. A lot of the time, they're not thinking about the future. It is a bit early for some conversations, and mum and dads think it's a waste of time. They go, oh, they're not listening. But for me, I say you're planting the seeds and you're starting to mold this young man or young woman into someone that thinks better about the future. And as you said, better communication patterns. And then you can start to have little conversations, and they might seem like a waste of time then to you. You go, oh, little Johnny's not listening, little Mary's distracted, looking at a phone. But it's actually going into their brains. And then if you start that pattern from then, and that goes right through for the next 15 years, where you have these conversations, you talk about the future, you talk about fair versus equal, you talk about bringing your choice of spouse, you start talking about financial acumen, you start building communication skills, you start treating them like an adult, then all of a sudden, these little conversations start to have a compounding effect on the end result 10 to 15 years down the track. So you're actually preparing the next generation and yourself to be able to get to the point where when this ultimate succession, you come to the penultimate time where mum and dad are starting to really step back and the next generation stepping in, it becomes almost not an event. It kind of happens. And people turn around and go, oh, gee, we're kind of here. But if you don't start early enough, then it becomes this pain down the track.
Agree. And it's demystifying what is succession. Almost succession has a negative connotation for people. as opposed to it's just part of normal good business planning. And whether you're a farming business or another industry, if you want that business to continue to evolve, to move to another generation or whatever else, then it's just part of business planning. So it's been demonised, I think, succession as far as the context of work, because you only ever hear the bad stories, don't you? You never really hear or see the good stories, but there are so many more good stories that are out there because it has worked. And for all those things you've said, that started early, developed a style of communication, treated people as they needed to as they evolved from, teenagers to young adults to, more mature adults, married partners and all that sort of stuff. And so it's so much easier to do that when you've got a framework that just is open to conversation at the appropriate level and everyone feels comfortable about it, because then it's just normal business.
It is, yeah. And it's also easy to influence your kids when they're younger than when they're older. And I always like to explain, when you've got teenagers or early 20s, they're still listen to mum and dad a little bit. Like, yeah, they'll push back and they'll roll their eyes, but you still got influence. Whereas the older they get, the less influence you had on them, especially when they move out of home, they go off to uni, they get jobs, they get partners, and then influences outside of the family become far louder. And so if you're trying to influence them to develop them into future leaders and give them the habits they need as an individual and also as a family, so much easier to start when they're little than when they're big. Yeah, I just think that it makes sense. It makes perfect sense for me. And don't make it this big thing is the other thing, is if you make it this big thing, we need to talk about succession, kids, and they look at you and go, I've just got out of school, or I'm 22, 23. What do I even care? Like, I don't even know why we're having this conversation. Whereas if you just talk about we're having a family meeting or we're having family meetings, and whether we've got a facilitator or we're part of a group or just on our own, let's start having conversations about what the future looks like. And if mum and dad are like, well, the kids don't really know, we'll start talking about what your ideal future looks like. Hey, look, in the next 10 to 15 years, your dad and I, we're going to start to wind back and we've got to make some decisions about the future. Our path could be either we go up to, I'm just making stuff up here, but let's say we go to 60, 65, and then we're going to actually take a big step back. And then their business is either going to be sold, if that's what you decide to do, and we're going to retire to the beach, or we're going to keep the business going and there's going to be a position there to be able to take over. Now, you guys could step up, one of you, all of you, whatever, or we could get a farm manager in. And then you start having a chat about the future. So if you guys want to have a say in this, where do you think we could go in the future? What might it look like? And start to plant those seeds and get the kids thinking, and just be really, really remember that the first 5 years might just be really basic conversations with them about what are you doing? It doesn't have to be, going there. And I want people to think back to when their kids first started playing sport. The first time they started playing footy or soccer or netball, it's horrible to watch. Like when my daughter started playing netball, someone said, this will be the most frustrating 2 years of your lives. And I'd watch them and I'd remember inside not yelling out, going, just throw the ball. What are you doing? And there's one girl chewing on a pigtail, another one dancing. And it's like, oh my God, it's going to be the same when you have these family meetings. So remember, they're learning, they're growing, and also you're trying to learn. So treat it like that, but make it consistent, because consistency is far more important than frequency. And if you do that once a year when they're little, or 5 times a year, whatever it is, just be consistent. And I think if families could do that and start talking about the long-term planning, get rid of this succession word and just start talking about preparation for the future, where are we going, and visioning it, I think a lot of the angst would go away, and people like you, Tim, would have a much easier job when they come knocking on the door to be able to go, okay, right, now we've got to get to Tintax and have these real serious conversations and get the process in place and do all the mechanics and the tax and the structuring and all that sort of stuff. Well, then it becomes a much easier process.
Yep, 100%. Couldn't agree more. Can we bottle that and put it on the next lot of advertising?
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, if you think about a BHP or something like that, or a Commonwealth Bank, a big company, they wouldn't just go grab someone out there that's never had any training. They'd have a plan of where they're going to go. If they've got a CEO, they've got a succession plan for that CEO. Like, they know what's going to happen if he or she steps away. So just treat it like good business. And if you want to be successful in business, you've got to start acting like you're successful in business.
That's right. And look, unfortunately, too many, don't do anything. So they're just leaving it to chance what might happen. So, someone has an accident, has an injury or whatever else, and they go, no, gee, there's no plan in place, there's no redundancy. And it's, it's as simple as that. So if this happened, well, what would we do? How would we think about it? who's interested and all those. But if you don't ask the questions, you don't know. You might assume again, and children might look and go, "Oh, I could see myself in there, but I'm never going to ask. I'll wait to be invited." And parents are looking at their kids going, "Oh, that one will be the farmer. That one's going to be that. That one's going to be that," type thing. And they all think they know, and then they get surprised at times about who is and who isn't. And much better just to, as you say, build that continuity, build that consistency, evolve the language in the family around the communication and how they engage, and just treat it as a normal sort of thing. Don't treat it as an unusual or a scary thing. Just, this is just a normal thing. It's just normal conversations.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I've got a beautiful story. I had a chat to a mum yesterday who's part of our high-performing families tribe, and their young fella's 16 and back on the farm, and he's a little rock star. He's such a great kid or young man. And it was interesting. She said, we started having these family meetings and conversations about 8 months ago, and asking them, like, what does your future look like? Where do you want to be? What's your plan? Like, what's your independent development plan? Where do you want to go? And as a 16-year-old, you get a lot of shoulder shrugging and sort of thinking, and I'm not really sure, and I'd kind of like to do. And I'm like, that's okay. And the change in that young man in about 6 to 9 months has been unbelievable. He's ingested it all. Mum and dad have started treating him more like an adult, and this young fella's just started to thrive. And I can just see this incredible acceleration ramp for him as he matures and grows into the role, which has just been amazing. But most parents are just afraid to have those conversations because they don't know what to do. And my advice is start having the conversations, stuff it up, make mistakes, and just get into it. Because if you don't start, 10 to 15 years will go by, and I guarantee you'll look back and go, shit, I wish I'd done something 10 years ago.
And I think you're right, Ben. There's like a lot of parents won't have that conversation because they think they've got to have all the answers to all the questions. You go, you don't even know what the questions are. So don't stress about not having the answers. But I think a lot of them feel like, well, everything's not tidied with a ribbon around it in a box and it's all in order. That's life. That's business. But you can evolve that by just opening up that conversation. So that's a great story about that young fellow. And the benefit is absolutely there for those that engage.
Yeah. And what is it if you are worried about a little bit of short-term pain, having these discussions? So if you're in the stage where your kids are 25, 26, 27, which is just you should be in the full swing of things by 25. But if your kids are about that age and you're worried about having the conversations, especially with partners coming in and we don't have the answers, there's two things. Number one, for me, I hammer this on all the time, Tim, is forgiveness. Like you've got to have a conversation with the family about, hey, we're all learning here. We don't have all the answers. We've got to be able to forgive each other and accept that we might say something that's not quite right, or we might have to renege on it. We might suggest something and then go, oh, we did the research. It's not. We have to be able to do that. And the second thing is avoiding short-term pain invariably leads to long-term suffering. And I can tell you, short-term pain is so much better than long-term suffering. If you've ever met anyone that's suffered long-term, you would take the short-term any day. So take the medicine now, get stuck in, and it's probably not going to be that painful, to be blunt.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. Dealing with whatever the issue is and, again, providing that clarity. But, the issue doesn't go away. It just continues to grow. It manifests and then becomes a much, much bigger issue. And invariably, it takes a lot of energy to run any business, but if that energy is negative energy, then it's really difficult to push anything forward. So dealing with that, addressing the issue, while it's somewhat contained or there's solutions around, 100% agree.
Yeah, awesome. All right, Tim. Well, we could talk about this for days, I'm sure, but we're coming up to the end now, mate. Just a couple of things. You do succession facilitation. You've got a lot of experience. Where can people find more about yourself and Proagtive online if they want to get in contact with you?
Yeah, so Proagtive, www.proagtive, so proagtive.com.au. Jess looks after the business as the general manager of the business. Reach out to Jess. So online website. There's, I think, now 14 facilitators in that business today, plus support staff covering, fundamentally all of East Coast Australia and across into South Australia as well. Occasionally a little bit to the West and Northern Territory. But that's the nature of the business there. So has capacity, has capability, and really good people that are all genuinely invested in the people and the outcomes and what they do, come from different backgrounds, but as a combination of skills, always work in pairs typically, doing the work because you need that to make that all work. But go to the website and inquire and pick up the phone and have a chat to Jess.
Awesome, Tim. Now, the one I like to leave every guest with before they go is the time machine one. So, Tim, if you could jump in a time machine, mate, zoom back in time to when you're in your mid-20s. I know that was only a blink of the eye a couple of years ago. You're in your mid-20s, or pick any time then. What's the bit of advice you'd give young Tim?
I would probably say, in hindsight, back yourself a bit more and take a few more risks. Calculate it, but, take a few more risks. I probably would have, if I had my time again, pushed harder to probably be involved or have an opportunity to be considered to be involved in the family business at the time. But being, one of six, the youngest of four boys out of the six type thing, those opportunities didn't really sort of present. But also I think probably learn to listen to myself a bit better and not necessarily. There's a lot of noise out there for all the things, but, do what's right, do what's appropriate, which I always feel I have, but have the courage to, to step in the space. In succession planning, there's a lot of energy, and it sometimes takes courage to have some of the conversations that need to be had. So be more confident around, if it's done and any conversation with the right intent is still appropriate. If you have an intent to hurt or harm, then no conversation's appropriate. So always having that positive intent, difficult conversations with the right intent, and, being prepared to back yourself a bit more in that regard.
I love it. It's interesting. I hope all the young people that are listening today, a common theme I say time and time again is back yourself. That's mine. And for many, many of the guests that come through is take more risk, back yourself, because most of what you worry about is never going to occur anyhow. But I love the one about being able to have a difficult conversation with the right intent, even if it goes wrong, is appropriate.
Yeah, it is. You're not trying to hurt or harm people. It's about trying to help people and evolve. But unfortunately, some people do start a conversation with the wrong intent, and that's just inappropriate. So if you can do it with the right heart, with the right intent, then you can always work through any issue.
Yeah, perfect, Tim. Awesome, mate. Well, thanks very much for today. I've got a couple of notes here, some real world beaters, which I'm going to steal off you, so to speak, and use again, because I always like to quote the people like I did with Jill today with the parent, child, adult. But I thought the number one for me was the better communication patterns. I like that, Tim. That was a real gold nugget for me, mate.
Great. Ben, thanks very much. Really appreciate the opportunity, and look forward to catching you another time.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Tim. Now, before you shoot off, I just want to give you a couple of quick takeaways. I might double up on some things I said at the end, but I think it's important to hammer these points home. Number one, create better communication patterns within your family. Hyper important. The frequency of your family meetings are far less important than the consistency. So make sure they're consistent. Don't worry about the frequency. If it's every 6 months, fine. If it's every 6 weeks, fine. You find your frequency, just make them very, very consistent. Number two, assumptions lead to gossip. We all know that when people aren't told or we don't discuss things, people start to make assumptions. It leads to gossip, and we all know where gossip ends up. Number three, you've got to get the next generation to morally connect to the outcome of your succession. So everyone's got to understand that it can't be equal necessarily, and equal doesn't always mean fair. So you need to have those conversations early, and we've got to get them so that everyone connects to it and essentially agrees with the outcome. Number four, practice. Practice your family communication. Do your family meetings. Practice makes perfect, and you have to be really understand that to start with, it's going to seem clunky, you're going to make mistakes, and it's not going to feel great. But over time, if it just becomes frequent enough, it'll become normal and you'll get better and better. The last one there is 5 to 15 years from succession, you should be doing what I call your future planning with your family, or family discussions about the future. You can even take the word succession out, because succession is just the byproduct of the ultimate strategy within the family. That might be a better language for you than succession, because quite often when you talk to the next generation about succession very, very early, they look at you and go, what are we having these discussions? Whereas if you talk about future planning, it can change the whole discussion. And finally, before we head off, I just want to say, if you aren't 5 to 15 years from succession, it's never too late. I know the best time might have been to start 10 to 15 years ago, but the second best time is now. So get in, get some help if you need to. Someone like Tim Lane or Proactive, get some help and get moving forward. Now, if this episode hit home, the big thank you can give us is to share it with another farming family that needs to hear it. And if you want to know more about what we do at AgriCoach, visit agricoach.com.au. So until next time, I'm Ben Law, I'm the financial bloke, and remember, it's more important who you are than what you've got. See you next time.